She was always the quiet one in the room, the one who sat in the back, eyes lowered, hands folded neatly in her lap. Her name was Mira. In school, no one really noticed her. She didn't speak much. She didn't join games. She never raised her hand in class. People said she was strange. Some called her boring. Others laughed and whispered behind her back. She probably has nothing to say, they joked. Why is she even here? Every day, Mira walked into the classroom alone and walked out the same way. Her books were always in order. Her notes, perfect, but none of that seemed to matter to the others. In a world that rewards loud voices and bold personalities, Mira's silence made her invisible. When she did speak, her voice was soft, so soft that people often talked over her. She tried once to participate in a group project, but was quickly dismissed. "We'll do the talking," someone said. "You just write everything down." She nodded and stayed quiet. But silence doesn't mean weakness, and stillness doesn't mean emptiness. What no one saw was that Mira was always listening, always observing. She noticed who was kind when no one was watching. She saw who smiled at the janitor, who shared their lunch, who only spoke loudly when others were around. She watched the world like a mirror, quietly collecting every reflection, every detail. One day, there was a notice on the school board, a competition, an inter-school speech contest. The topic was the power of words. Most students laughed when they saw it. "Mira should enter," someone said sarcastically. The room burst into laughter. Even the teacher smiled nervously. No one expected her to speak. She barely spoke in class. How could she speak on a stage? But that evening, Mira went home, sat at her small desk, and stared at a blank sheet of paper. She picked up her pen and began to write. Not for the competition, not for the applause, just for herself. The words flowed out like they had been waiting for years. Words about how the loudest voice isn't always the most powerful. Words about how silence can hold more truth than noise. Words about how the most beautiful thoughts are often hidden behind quiet eyes. 4 days, she wrote and rewrote, practiced in front of the mirror, whispered her lines late at night when everyone else was asleep. Her parents watched her quietly. They didn't say much, but they saw the fire in her that they hadn't seen before. The day of the speech arrived. The auditorium was filled with students from different schools. Confident voices echoed through the hall. One after another, speakers took the stage. They spoke with power, with flair, with pride. Then it was Mira's turn. Whispers filled the air. "Hirsch is going to speak. Let's see how this goes." Mira walked to the stage slowly. She stood behind the podium. For a moment, she looked at the audience. Hundreds of eyes staring at her, waiting, doubting, some even smiling, ready to laugh. She took a deep breath, and then, not because she forgot her words, but because she chose silence. She stood still, looking at the audience, not saying a word for 10 seconds, then 20. The murmurs started, confusion, curiosity, but then, stillness. When she finally spoke, her voice was soft, but it was steady. "They say silence is empty," she began, "but silence is full of meaning. It's in silence that we listen. It's in silence that we understand. And sometimes, silence speaks louder than words." The hall was quiet, not because they weren't listening, but because they were. She spoke about being overlooked, about how people laughed at her for being quiet, how the world often mistook silence for weakness. But she also spoke about how she learned to listen deeply, to observe, to feel what others ignored. She ended with these words: "Don't judge someone because they don't speak like you do. Don't laugh at the quiet ones, because sometimes it's the quiet ones who hear everything." When she finished, there was a pause, and then, slowly, applause. First polite, then louder. Then the whole hall stood up. Mira didn't smile. She just nodded slightly and walked off the stage. She didn't need to say anything more. Her silence had already spoken. She didn't win first prize that day, but something more powerful happened. People looked at her differently. The students who once ignored her came up and said, "I never knew you could speak like that." Some apologized. Others just stood in silence, unsure of what to say. Her teachers praised her. Her parents cried quietly when she told them what happened. She went home and wrote in her notebook, not for anyone else, just for herself. She kept writing, kept listening, kept growing. Years later, she became a writer. Her books touched people around the world. Readers said they felt like she understood them, like her words spoke the things they couldn't express. She never became loud. She never needed to. Her words did the talking, and those who once laughed at her, they remembered her, not as the girl who said nothing, but as the girl whose silence changed everything. Because sometimes the quietest voice carries the loudest truth, and sometimes silence is not the absence of words, but the presence of strength. Mira taught us all a lesson, that you don't have to shout to be heard. You don't have to fight to be seen. Just stay true to who you are. Let your silence speak. Let your actions echo. Let your heart guide your voice when the time is right. Because one day, the world will stop and listen. And in that moment, your silence will speak louder than words.